combat that dropout rate for those girls that are at that age when playing sport. So for example, you know, we're talking about the low body esteem, periods and puberty, and making conversations around periods and puberty something that is so easy to talk about. Puma have got a fantastic campaign at the moment that they've launched, just making girls comfortable when they are on their period with the right clothing, girls thinking that they're not good enough or in adequate facilities, and the lack of positive role models is something that's been spoken about for years, but I think that that's something that is now on the up. So Laura, I'd love to hear your experiences and your thoughts on any barriers that you experienced in your career.
Yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn, Mika, and lovely to be with you. Yeah, to be honest, I'm going to say something a bit radical here, just because I get increasingly frustrated about how we're going over old ground with these debates. You know, we had these debates when I was playing football. Laurie's quite right to allude to them because they affect how girls experience football now, and indeed for that matter all sports. But it's a huge source of frustration to me that we're still having the same debates about why girls are put off sport, as if it's girls' fault. And I'm not criticizing anybody here. It is not girls' fault that sport is not attractive to them. It's the way sport is organized and run and governed and managed mostly by men. And we need to sort of throw a few hard truths out there, really. The governance of sport is still in the dark ages. Whether you take club structures or whether you take area associations, whether you take leagues, whether you take national associations like the FAW, the 𝗟RU, Welsh cricket, and so on. Even though some progress has been made, the governance of sport is still in the dark ages. And I don't think in any other sector we would be comfortable to revisit these kind of questions about how girls receive sport whilst we have such a flawed infrastructure. And the reason I say that is because it's about voice, it's about agency, and it's about knowing how to strategize to change some of those pretty abysmal statistics that you've displayed on the screen there. And I think so much good is happening in sport now. I mean, it doesn't surprise me one bit that we've got massive investment in the Women's Champions League and in the Women's Euro in England, and we've got fabulous ticket sales and great corporate interest. Because in a way, women's sport has always been box office. It's been men selling the tickets. So until we get that right, we shouldn't be surprised when things fall into place as they have now, but we should demand much, much more. We still have a lot of clubs in pretty much every sport, except sports which are female dominated, like, say, for example, gymnastics, netball, and so on. In virtually every other sport, it is men making decisions about how girls and women receive sport and enjoy it. Therefore, it shouldn't surprise us at all that there are still some really important structural boundaries. The other point I would make at the moment, and I'll shut up then, but it's a constant source of frustration for me, is that we're going over old ground, aren't we here? I remember the first school sports survey when I was still chair of Sport Wales, and bear in mind that's probably the biggest sports survey, comprehensive sports survey anywhere in Europe in terms of the number of young people it hits. We were told then, so that's at least a decade ago, that the things that girls want most from sport is some acquisition of skills, mostly fun activities. There's got to be an enjoyment element in it. And secondly, doing it with their friends. And if we haven't provided those three things, we're all failing in sport, because that's not much to ask, is it really? They're pretty basic things. So I think my kind of challenge to everybody who's working in sport is to take a good, long, hard look at how you do things. And if you're not doing those things right, you need to go back to basics, and you need to make sure you've got women and girls' voices at every tier of your organization. If you haven't, you're missing the boat on probably a whole host of those areas.
And I really appreciate your honesty there, Laura, because it is a difficult topic to talk about. And as you say, it's something that's been talked about for years. And through all my time in sport, all I think of when I think of the infrastructure of my sports is I think of white-haired men in suits who are running behind the scenes. So I suppose a question I'd love to ask you as well is how, for women who want to get behind the scenes and progress their sport. Because I had an opportunity the other day to apply for a position at Tennis Wales, and I didn't feel that I had the credentials to do that and the confidence to do that. So how could you, what advice would you give to women who want to help within sport behind the scenes?
Well, I understand that entirely, Mika, because there's always a sense that, do I know enough, and am I confident enough, and have I got all the requisite skills to take part in these areas? Well, my advice to you is have a look at the people who are currently running sport, and you'll find that in most cases, they don't have the requisite skills. They have some of the experience, but they certainly don't have a contemporary and up-to-date grasp of how sport should be run. I can guarantee you that virtually any woman on this call will offer something better than most of the men who are currently running sport. Most, because there are some really good men in sport as well. And believe me, we need their allyship. We need them to champion women. We need them to nurture women. We need sometimes them to move aside to let a woman come through, because, it can be hard to relinquish power, but that's a really, really important thing. But I would say to anybody who's thinking about getting involved in the governance of sport, do it. Because honestly, when I finished playing football, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to go down the coaching route for time reasons. And I sort of accidentally got involved in governance through joining the board of UK Sport and then Sport Wales, and more recently working with Laurie and the team at the 𝗂𝗶𝗶 and UEFA. But it's been every bit as fulfilling as playing. For me to feel that I can add my strategic thinking to how we develop our sport is as important to me as going on the pitch wearing the Welsh shirt, because I really care about the next generation of players, and I don't want them to experience the kind of things that we all experienced growing up in our sport. And by the way, if you were to do a really brutal warts and all analysis of sport, what you'd find is that the sports that are actually well run with regard to girls and women tend to be the ones that get least media attention. The ones that are less well run are the ones that are most popular in terms of public appeal, so rugby, football, athletics, and so on. And there's a reason for that, because at the moment there's very little space for women to penetrate those worlds. It would be relatively easy, I think, to get involved in the governance of some of the smaller sports. And I would advocate that, because they're just as important as rugby and football and the other sports. But it says something about the reluctance of some people to relinquish power and make sure that their sports are representative and where women have real agency.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. And Amy, we've talked quite in depth there, but what about the sexism in football? We know that this is a bit of a barrier for participation, but how can we combat that?
Absolutely. I think something we've learned since starting the campaign last year is just how many levels that sexism exists, and therefore how many barriers there are at every level. And that's from, like girls at primary school all the way up to women working in the Premier League. Like we've seen and spoken to women from all of these parts of the sport and understood that, okay, this is a deeper problem. But in terms of moving forward and how do we get through those barriers? How do we lift those barriers? A lot of it does start with education. A lot of it starts with visibility. Like we've mentioned the Euros already. I think with that visibility comes participation, because then there's role models that young girls can look up to. And if there's more participation, there's more funding, there's more chances to open up all girls sessions, and we've just seen how one of the barriers is that, judging from other people, particularly boys, things like that, all of that kind of trickles down from the top. And I think that the education of also in terms of what women do experience at this level, that's why I started kind of as part of the campaign, because I started to share my experiences of what messages I was receiving, what comments I was receiving just from doing, social media bits online about football and the football team that I follow. And from that came a kind of connection with other girls who were going through the same. From that, we've developed the campaign, and we've kind of opened up a lot of people's eyes into what women across the sport kind of go through on a day-to-day basis. So I think a lot of it's just about opening people's eyes and educating in that way.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it there. Social media has often had a bad reputation, but I think at the moment it's got we could utilize it as a fantastic tool to progress in sport for women as well. And Loury, with all that's been said so far, how important is a safe space and initiatives like Environments for Her in women's sport?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been such an interesting project that we've kind of like undertaken over the last 6 months. And it kind of just started from this idea of, understanding some of the barriers and the challenges that girls are facing. But then when we started really kind of active listening to women and girls from across Wales, some of the tiny changes that people can make, and it goes back to Laura's points, right? Because facilities, for example, because facility development has always been managed and developed, and these buildings and 3G pitches have been built by men, there are some things that just aren't in their lens, right? So, for example, one of the biggest areas that girls were telling us that they're having challenges with is their practical needs aren't being met by the facilities that they're provided with. So the story goes, girls are walking into a changing room on a Saturday or a Sunday to play their matches, and there is one seated toilet, and the toilet seat is broken, the lock doesn't work, and there's no sanitary bins, and then there's 5 stinking urinals. There's nothing that tells a young girl that she doesn't belong than walking into that environment. But that's such an easy fix, right? Because now with all of the facility investment that we're with the grants in the FAW, it's making sure that anybody applying for these facility grants, they must absolutely ensure that their facilities are female friendly, right, and or are accessible. So it's not just seeing things through a male lens. And the other thing, absolutely, we touched on it before around the fear of judgment. Young girls are telling us that they fear going to a 3G pitch where the boys team are coming on straight after them because they're encroaching onto their space before the girls' session is finished, and they might be, making the odd comment. It's just some of the words, the language that they're using around the kind of young girls that's having an impact on them. So how do we just shift the narrative with that? And when at the start of the season, when you're looking at coordinating all of the different usage time, why don't we just have female only nights, one night a week? It doesn't have to just be exclusively football. It could be football, rugby, whatever sports that could take place on that 3G. But the importance of prioritizing female use it is so important to us. And look, we wax lyrical, don't we, about kind of awareness and access to visible female role models. And when we talk about visible female role models, we're not just talking about your national team players. You're talking about the female coaches, that are just starting out on their leaders, on their leaders awards and things like that. So no, the Environments for Her piece, and maybe I'll drop it in the chat for people to check it out and have a little look through it. It's been so insightful because the majority of things that young women are telling us are such easy fixes. They really are.
No, and what you've said there, having women only nights to provide a safe space, or like you said about having coaches that are females, I'm very lucky from a sport like athletics where there are a lot of female coaches, and there are a lot of successful female coaches as well to look up to. But possibly in other sports, it's an area for an improvement, and to show that people can fill in that role as well, and to have the confidence to go forward for those roles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sorry, Laurie, go on, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that in terms of you're saying about, female coaches, etc., and female in decision-making positions, what we also need to be careful of is when you have one female around that table, people assume that whatever that one female says is the gospel for it's how all women and girls feel, right? Whereas mine and Laura's opinions might be completely different. So if I'm around the table and I'm making decisions around, engaging young girls in football, Laura might have completely different views. But no, everybody just thinks that whatever Laurie says, she's the token woman around the table, it must be gospel. So just having that one isn't enough. It's getting to that kind of tipping point where you're at 30%, 40%. So there is that kind of cognitive diversity as well around the table.
Can I jump in, Mika, just to say two things? One, to bounce off Laurie's last point, which I think is a really good one. There's a hell of a lot of tokenism in sports governance at the moment, where people feel that they've made tremendous strides where they get maybe 20% of their board female, or even 20% of their board from a Black and minority ethnic background, and they think they've done it, and you can't do it on that basis. You've got to change culture, and change thinking, and furthermore, you need to have women involved in boards who are critical thinkers. If you're just going to bring on women who are there because they're women, and this isn't being insulting to anybody, by the way, but I know some men in sports governance who are quite happy with just recruiting anybody who can tick a box for them, rather than somebody who's going to come with knowledge and experience and attitude. We need attitude, honestly. We need determination and confidence to speak out. So I think we've got to be very mindful of that at the moment, because I think we're at a tipping point. As governing bodies think they cracked this, they probably haven't. And, you know, I sat on the board of UK Sport for 2.5 terms, and I know that some of the problems that UK Sport governing bodies are facing now is because the board of UK Sport was insufficiently diverse, and not diverse representationally, but had too many people from Olympic and Paralympic sports governing. So they missed things in their wing mirrors. But the reason I was going to jump in, Mika, and I won't dominate the conversation then, was just to say the role models that I think we need are actually even closer to home. Their mums, their grands, their aunties, their sisters. Because I've got 2 daughters, and I watch how other mums behave with their daughters and talk to them about sport. And believe me, it's with the best intentions, I'm sure, but it's not conducive to giving them a belief that sport is really something that can give them great friendship and fun through their lives. Whereas, you know, if you've played sport yourself, you all know this on the call, you know that some of your best friendships, even when you get older, are with the people you played sport with. 𝗟𝘂𝗿 and me still kick a ball around in our vets football team every Thursday. And it's very competitive, as 𝗟𝘂𝗿 will know, because we're all competitive sports people. But mostly it's about friendship. You know, we'll go for a beer and we'll enjoy the crack and talking about sport again. And that's what I've tried to instill in my girls, is that, you know, it doesn't matter whether you're good at sport, it's whether you're having fun and whether you're really enjoying it. And that will come from family and from teachers ahead of anybody who's playing competitive sport in reality. Because to really relate to elite athletes, you've got to feel you're close to being an elite athlete yourself. If you're not, then just Fishlock telling you something won't mean anything really. It will be your sister or your friend or your teacher or your mum, basically. And we need to really encourage that kind of mentorship.
And I completely agree. I think you apologized for talking there, and you speak so much good truth, because it is what it's about, isn't it? I've been in sport now for over 15 years, and sadly this year is the first year I realized it's all about having fun and enjoying it, because they're the memories that you'll remember as you get older. And the youngsters that I talk to coming through, that's what I try and say to them. It's just about having fun. You won't always be performing at your highest level, or you won't always be off to an Olympic Games, or, you know, it's about making good memories. So